The hype around Xilonen is off the charts, and I'm about to dive deep into all the leaks about her. So in this video, I'll go over her kit, elemental skill, elemental burst, passives, and constellations. I'll make a part 2 of the video covering her weapons, artifacts, team composition, and materials required. So stay tuned for that as well. Now mind you, all these info are as at the date of recording of this video, so certain percentages most likely will change. So keep that in mind. Now without further ado, let's see what her kit is. Xilonen is a 5-star Geo support / main DPS who uses a sword for her weapon. She's supposedly a Geo buffer and an enemy's resistance shredder, and she scales off of her defense. So basically, she's a Geo Kazuha. As per the leaker Impact Mouse, Xilonen will be released in version 5.1. She'll have her own banner alongside Chiori in the first half of version 5.1. Nahida and Hu Tao will be released in the second half of 5.1. When it comes to her normal and plunging attacks, these are fairly similar to other sword characters, but her charged attack, now when used, does a nice little forward kick to the enemies, which is kind of cool. When she's in her Night Soul's Blessings mode, she'll enter her Rollerblade mode. And in this mode, all her normal attacks will be converted to kicks. She'll be able to do 4 kick attacks using her rollerblades like this in a row, but she won't be able to do her charged attacks in this mode. Also, when in her rollerblade mode, all her normal and plunging attacks will scale off of her defense stat, and she'll gain Geo Infusion, which cannot be overridden by any other element. Yep, this means Benny can be used on her team. Here are her normal, charged, and plunging attack damages at the date of recording this video. These numbers will most certainly change, so I'm not going to go over this, but you guys can pause and have a look at the numbers. Now let's go over some other benefits her rollerblade mode does. It is important to keep in mind that when she's in this Night Soul's Blessings mode, she'll continuously consume Night Souls until it is depleted or cancelled. This state will also switch her to rollerblade mode, which increases her movement and climbing speed. She can also transform into an Ocelot and perform high-speed leaps if you press the jump button when climbing. Something like this bro over here, but much cooler looking. Also, Xilonen's Night Soul's Blessing also has a couple of restrictions. Her Night Souls points have a time limit of 9 seconds, after which her Night Souls will deplete immediately. Also, after she depletes all her Night Souls, she won't be able to get the benefits from her passive one. I'll explain her passives in more detail after going over her elemental burst. This brings us to her elemental skill. When she uses her skill, she rushes forward and does Night Soul aligned Geo damage to enemies. This Geo damage scales off of her defense. After using her skill, she gains 45 Night Souls points and switches to her rollerblade mode. She also has a passive ability called Sampler, which generates soundscapes or sound effects based on the elemental types of her party members. Now, when activated, these sound effects will reduce the resistance of nearby enemies to those elemental types. She has 3 samplers, which means she can have 3 elemental types of sound effects to reduce the enemy's resistance. The elements that she can use like this are Pyro, Hydro, Cryo, and Electro. Geo is the initial element in the 3 samplers, but if you have any party member with Pyro, Hydro, Cryo, or Electro, the samplers will change it to these elements. The priority is given to Pyro, then Hydro, then Cryo, and then to Electro. But don't worry about Geo getting overridden, as when she's in her Night Soul state, the Geo sampler will remain active. When her Night Souls points are maxed, she'll consume all her Night Souls points and activate all 3 samplers for 15 seconds. And after unlocking her first passive, she'll be able to regenerate Night Souls for herself. I'll go over her passive talents later in the video. Now, when the samplers are active, it will reduce nearby enemies' elemental resistance of the corresponding sampler's elemental type. However, you cannot stack these elemental types by having multiple party members of the same element. In cases like this, only one sampler will change to that element. But the best part about this is she can trigger these sound effects even when she's off field. Here are her elemental skill related damages and durations for Xilonen at skill level 10. The initial rush outputs a damage of 332.6% of her defense. The elemental resistance decrease is at 36% per element. For durations, the samplers can be active for 15 seconds, and Xilonen's Night Souls points have a time limit of 9 seconds. She can have a maximum limit of 90 Night Souls, and her elemental skill also has a cooldown of 7 seconds. So even though her Night Souls has a time limit of 9 seconds, since her skill's cooldown is 7 seconds, using her as a main DPS is quite viable actually. And hopefully, she won't turn out to be another Clarenda situation. And so this brings us to her elemental burst. Her burst is very simple actually, as when she uses it, she activates a phlogiston stereo and will do Night Souls aligned geo damage to enemies in an AoE. And this damage also scales off of her defense stat. In addition to this, if she has at least 2 samplers with an elemental conversion of Pyro, Hydro, Cryo, or Electro, then she'll generate a rhythm that periodically heals the active character based on her defense. Also, if she has only 1 or no sampler with those elemental conversions, she'll generate 2 more beats that do AoE geo damage based on her defense. Here are the damages and healing she can do with her elemental burst at burst level 10. Burst does an initial damage of 506.3% of her defense. She can do continuous healing of 187.2% of her defense plus 1102. The additional 2 beats will do additional damage of 506.3% of her defense. Xilonen's burst has a cooldown of 15 seconds and has an energy cost of 60. Now let's have a look at her passive talents. With the first passive talent active, when she's in the rollerblade mode, and if she has 2 or more samplers with elemental conversions, she gains 35 Night Souls points after hitting an enemy with her normal or plunging attack. She can trigger this passive once every 0.1 second. Similarly, if she has 1 or no samplers with any elemental conversions, her overall damage is increased by 30%. This second part is very useful for those going with Geo teams or those of you who will use her as a main DPS. When it comes to her second passive talent, if her Night Souls points max out while in the rollerblade mode, she'll trigger one of the effects I talked about in her elemental burst. The type of effects, as I mentioned, depends on the number of samplers with elemental conversion. She can trigger her passive too once every 14 seconds. Additionally, this passive will also increase Xilonen's defense by 20% for 15 seconds if another party member triggers a Night Souls burst. With her third passive active, while in the rollerblade mode, if all her Night Souls points are depleted, she'll start to consume the phlogiston to keep this rollerblade mode active. Also, just like with other Natlan characters, Xilonen will also have a special switching animation if you try to switch to her while running or climbing. This switching will immediately give her 20 Night Souls points, and she'll trigger the rollerblade mode for 4 seconds. If you use her skill during this time, her rollerblade mode will get this 4 seconds plus the skill's full duration, just like other Natlan characters. So the best way to switch to Xilonen during combat is while running, which will give you 13 seconds of her rollerblade mode. Finally, this brings us to her Constellations. With her C1 unlocked, Xilonen's Night Souls and phlogiston consumption is reduced by 30%, and her Night Souls point time limit is extended by 45%. Additionally, when she has active samplers, she raises the interruption resistance of the active character. With her C2 unlocked, all party members will get these buffs depending on the source sampler that matches their elemental type. Geo characters will gain a plus 30% crit rate. Pyro characters will get plus 40% attack. Hydro characters will obtain a plus 40% max HP. Cryo characters will gain a plus 40% crit damage, and Electro characters will restore 20 energies and have their elemental burst cooldown reduced by 5 seconds. Xilonen's C3 will increase her elemental skill level by 3. With her C4 unlocked, her elemental skill will grant all party members with a buff that increases their normal, charged and plunging attack damage by 65% of Xilonen's defense for 15 seconds. This effect will be cancelled after triggering 6 times or when the duration ends. This buff will count based on the number of enemies hit, and each party member can have their own independent buff. Her C5 will increase the elemental burst level by 3. With her C6 unlocked, while in her rollerblade mode, if she sprints, jumps, or uses normal or plunging attacks, she'll increase her damage for 5 seconds. And during this 5 seconds, her Night Soul's point time limit countdown will be paused. She'll also not consume any Night Soul's points, phlogiston, or any stamina during this time. Also during this time, even if her Night Soul's points max out, she would still be in her rollerblade mode. Similarly, with her C6, she'll deal additional plus 300% more normal and plunging attack damage while in her rollerblade mode. All these effects from her C6 can be triggered once every 15 seconds. So that is with part 1 of the video. In part 2, I'll go over Xilonen's weapons, artifacts, team composition, and materials required for her ascension. So stay tuned for that video. And again, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe so I can make more awesome content like this. See you in part 2 of Xilonen Leaks.